Sycamore Lane's Last Secret. Sycamore Lane was postcard perfect. Porch swings, Sunday hymns drifting through screen doors, and lawns trimmed so neat you'd swear nothing ugly could root there. Clara Jennings once believed that too, until the day her husband's rage painted the kitchen walls with shattered china. Neighbors watched curtains flutter, then settle. The town sighed and looked away. But secrets have short lifespans when loyalty wears a badge and 4 paws. The evening officer Gabe Whitaker parked under an old maple for lunch. His partner Arlo caught a scent the wind had carried too long. One leap, a streak of fur across quiet lawns, and Sycamore Lane's prettiest porch became a battleground. This video isn't only about the rescue, it's about the after. What happens when a woman decides to live in color again? When a town stakes its reputation on standing guard, and when a retired canine becomes guardian of a garden filled with sunflowers and second chances. Keep watching, because every small town has a last secret, and sometimes the way to expose it is to listen for the growl beneath the hymn. The bell above the kindergarten door chimed like a wind chime in spring, soft and happy, announcing the start of another morning in Miss Clara Jennings' class. Willow Haven Elementary sat at the edge of town, framed by sugar maple trees whose leaves blushed gold in October. It was the kind of town where bicycles leaned trustingly against fences and neighbors still borrowed sugar from one another. But here in room 2B, something even more rare bloomed each morning: kindness in motion. Clara knelt beside a boy named Eli, whose tiny fingers struggled with a blunt pair of safety scissors. "Try this," she whispered, guiding his hands, like a butterfly flapping its wings. The room shimmered with light filtered through crayon-colored paper hanging in the windows. Handmade butterflies, each with a child's name written in swirled marker, fluttered from the ceiling, suspended by thread and hope. Clara had come up with the project during her first year teaching, after reading a story about transformation. Since then, every child who entered her room added their name to the growing garden of wings overhead. "Miss Jennings, mine has sparkles," Chloe announced proudly, holding up a pink butterfly dusted with glitter. Clara smiled. "Then yours will sparkle brighter than all the rest, just like you." The children's laughter rippled through the air like bird song. Clara loved this hour best, before the world outside came rushing in with its grown-up noise. She walked the room barefoot, a habit she'd kept from childhood, her shoes neatly tucked by her desk. It made the children feel at home, she thought, and maybe in truth, it made her feel less like a teacher and more like herself. Every corner of her classroom had a story. The words like brave or shy, and the window ledge garden box that somehow still drew daffodils in October. The room wasn't perfect, but it was hers and theirs. Clara Jennings was the kind of teacher children remembered as adults, long after they forgot how to spell caterpillar. She hummed while she taught, called every student sweetheart without sounding false, and had a quiet gift for noticing when someone's heart was heavy. She never raised her voice, she didn't need to, but Clara also knew how tightly appearances were stitched in Willow Haven. It was a town where people smiled at church, gossiped at the diner, and expected everyone to be just fine. Clara had lived here her whole life, and learned early to walk softly, speak gently, and never bring attention to sadness unless it wore a smile. Her own parents had passed when she was just 20, her mother from breast cancer, her father from heartbreak 2 winters later. Since then, Clara had built her own little world from scraps of memory, warm coffee, and laminated lesson plans. And here, in room 2B, she had everything she thought she'd ever need: children who adored her, parents who trusted her, and a job that filled her heart with purpose. But even as she pressed a gold sticker onto Eli's butterfly, a flicker of something moved in the corner of her awareness. A shadow across the window pane. A man outside, tall, with a tool belt slung low, and a carpenter's pencil behind his ear. She didn't know it yet, but that single moment, barely a glance, would echo through every hallway of her life. It started with a window pane and a cracked whisper of wind. A janitor had taped the corner with clear plastic weeks ago, but the chill kept seeping in. The children complained of cold fingers during coloring time. So, on a Wednesday morning lined with frost, a man arrived in room 2B, carrying a toolbox and whistling an old Merle Haggard tune like he didn't have a care in the world. Matthew Reed was tall, tan, and easy on the eyes, in a way that made even Mrs. Callahan from the front office peek through the blinds. He wore a plaid flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow, revealing strong forearms smudged with old paint and sawdust. A pencil was tucked behind one ear. His belt held a hammer, a tape measure, and a folded measuring guide. But it was the way he looked at Clara Jennings, like she was the only thing in the room not broken, that made her stomach flutter. "You must be Miss Sunshine," he said, flashing a crooked grin. "They said the butterfly lady was the one in charge." Clara blinked. What?" He tilted his head toward the ceiling. "The butterflies. Never seen anything like it. I'd say you're teaching science, art, and kindness all at once." She smiled, caught off guard. "They're about the most beautiful thing I've heard all year." He worked while the children practiced writing the letter M. He didn't rush. Each pane was measured carefully. Clara noticed how he used a rag to gently dust the frame before removing the old caulk. At one point, he whistled a tune softly, and one of the little girls joined in. When the children asked questions, he answered them kindly, said things like, "Everything has a shape and a reason, just like people." Before he left, he brought Clara a paper cup of coffee. "I've figured you run on caffeine and magic," he said. "Cream, no sugar. That's how teachers like it, right?" She laughed. "Lucky guess." "Nope," he replied, "just paying attention." He called her Sunshine again that day, and the next, and the day after that. By the time the new windows were in, Clara found herself glancing at the hallway clock in anticipation. When he left for the last time, he pressed a handwritten note into her palm, folded into a butterfly. "Dinner sometime," it read, scrawled in confident all-caps handwriting. Below it, a number. Clara stared at it for a long time after he'd gone. Her fingers traced the wings. Their courtship unfolded fast, like summer rain on dry ground, so sudden it left people blinking. Matthew showed up at school with little surprises. A thermos of pumpkin soup, a vintage copy of The Velveteen Rabbit, a bundle of daisies in brown paper. Clara hadn't dated in over 3 years. She didn't know how to receive attention without apologizing for it, but Matthew made it easy. He spoke with certainty, said things like, "You've got this calming magic about you, and you make the world feel warmer." In a town like Willowhaven, love bloomed under street lamps and whispers. People noticed. They clapped her on the back at the diner. "He's a catch," they said. "You two just fit." Even Principal Monroe gave his blessing. Good to see someone appreciating our Clara. For the first time in years, Clara felt seen. Not just liked, chosen. She met Matthew's mother, a brisk woman with a thick silver braid, who eyed Clara's dress and nodded. "You'll civilize him," she said, as if that were praise. Matthew proposed 3 months later, on the school playground under the butterfly archway the children had made for spring. Clara's hands trembled as she said yes. A month after that, she walked down the aisle in a lace gown her sister Rachel helped hem the night before. But even sunshine cast shadows when the clouds roll in. The first red flag was wrapped in laughter. They were at a barbecue hosted by Gabe Whitaker, the local officer, and his wife, Mary Ann. Someone asked Clara about her favorite book. Before she could answer, shopping for a wedding dress. Matthew vetoed her first 3 choices. "Too much skin," he said. "You're too beautiful for that." She told herself it was sweet, protective, that maybe modesty meant respect. The third was folded into the decision she never really made. "You're so good with kids," Matthew said one night, brushing hair from her face. "You should stay home, build something of your own." He kissed her temple. "Teaching was just a chapter. This'll be the real story." Clara nodded. The words caught in her throat like dry leaves. She didn't want to disappoint him. And part of her, just part, wanted to be that kind of wife. The one who made pies, grew zinnias, kept the windows spotless. The next morning, she submitted her resignation. It wasn't until the butterflies came down, each name folded away in tissue paper, that Clara felt something loosen inside her, like a stitch undone. But by then, Matthew had moved in. And when the neighbors waved, they saw only a pretty couple on a porch swing, sipping lemonade in the golden hour. No one asked what Clara saw when the curtains were drawn. The last day of school came quietly. Clara didn't pack up her classroom the way she thought she might one day, with joy or ceremony or even sadness. There was no final story time under the feelings tree, no butterfly release into the spring air. Instead, a resignation letter had been typed in 12-point font and delivered without fanfare. "To start a family," it read. Neat, palatable, acceptable. The kind of reason towns like Willow Haven didn't question. "I'm proud of you," Matthew had said the night she sent it. "You're making the right choice." But the moment the letter left her hand, a strange stillness crept into her life, like air gone stale in a closed-off room. At first, Clara filled her days with small things, organizing the spice rack alphabetically, planting herbs in mason jars, ironing Matthew's shirts just so. She told herself this was womanhood, marriage, the gentle rhythm of nesting. But then the visits stopped. Marianne's texts went unanswered. Her sister Rachel left voicemails, with longer pauses between each call. Clara never meant to retreat. She just found herself exhausted, or too busy, or not quite ready for company. "I just need time to adjust," she whispered once, to no one in particular. By autumn, her world had shrunk to the size of the house. A white, clapboard cottage 2 blocks off Main Street, where the curtains always stayed drawn, skirts, the coral lipstick, the bright earrings the kids used to compliment. Slowly, her colors faded. It wasn't sudden. That's what she told herself. Matthew still brought her coffee some mornings, still kissed her forehead, still wrapped his arms around her at night with a kind of possessive tenderness that felt almost like safety. But there were days, quiet, stretched-out days, when Clara felt like a ghost in her own home. The laughter in the walls had gone silent. Her hands, once ink-stained and glitter-dusted, now trembled over cold countertops. And the silence. It wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, like being underwater. She kept a notebook hidden behind the flour tin, not to journal, not anymore. Matthew had once read a page and said, "Why write things down if you're not planning to share them?" So she stopped. Instead, she kept lists, things I must not forget. Eli's laugh when he spilled blue paint. The way butterflies sleep with their wings closed. The smell of crayons in the morning. That I was once happy, Some days she would open the notebook just to run her fingers over the ink, to remember the shape of herself, to remember that her world had once been more than recipes and polite phone calls to his mother. By winter, even the birds outside her window seemed quieter. Matthew had started coming home later. No explanation, no apology. Just the clink of keys on the entry table, and the smell of cologne that wasn't hers. He never raised his voice, but his silence could hollow out a room. "Everything okay?" she asked once, as they stood in the kitchen, the tea kettle beginning to steam. He didn't look up. Why wouldn't it be? That was all. So she learned not to ask again. One afternoon, while folding towels, Clara found a letter from her sister Rachel tucked into the laundry basket. "You can always come home, even now, even if you feel like you can't." The words blurred. She tucked the letter into her coat pocket and never mentioned it. It was nearly dusk when Clara stood at the kitchen window, her hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug. Outside, the neighborhood children ran across the empty lot next door, a game of tag unfolding in bursts of giggles and shrieks. A girl tripped and laughed. A boy offered her his mittened hand. It was nothing, really, just children being children. But Clara couldn't look away. She pressed her palm against the glass, not to push through it, just to feel something cool, something real. The glass fogged beneath her breath. For a second, she imagined herself on the other side, kneeling in the grass, calling out encouragement. "Tag her back, careful near the fence." But the moment passed. Inside the house, a clock ticked too loudly. The walls were too clean, too quiet. Her butterflies were packed in tissue, buried in a box of curtains. The light from outside spilled onto her face and stopped at the sill. She turned away before it could follow her in. It started with the bruise. Small, pale yellow at first, like a fading sun beneath her skin. Just above the wrist bone, half hidden beneath the sleeve of her cardigan. She hadn't even realized it was there until she reached up to brush her hair into a clip and caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror. She paused, blinked, then tilted her arm under the soft bulb overhead. A smudge of blue-gray deepened under the skin. Clara touched it lightly and flinched. The night before had blurred at the edges. Matthew had come home late, again, and the stew had gone cold on the stove. She'd tried to reheat it, tried to make conversation. But something in his eyes had been darker than usual, quiet, brooding. "I just wish you'd wait up sometimes," he said. "You act like I don't matter." When she gently replied, "I was tired," he reached out, not to hit, not exactly, but to grab. His fingers had locked around her wrist with more force than she expected. She remembered the heat of his grip, the way her body stiffened, but it had passed. Just like always, he let go. She apologized, and the stew was forgotten. That morning he brought her flowers, daisies, her favorite, though he rarely remembered. A neat bouquet in brown paper, held in his calloused hands like a peace treaty. "I'm sorry about last night," Matthew said, his voice low, eyes soft. Clara nodded and took the bouquet, unsure where to put it. He kissed her cheek. "I downloaded something that might help us stay connected," he added casually, setting her phone on the counter. "Just a location tracker, nothing big, just in case, just in case." She smiled faintly. Of course. But something in her stomach knotted, like a string pulled too tight. That evening, while watering the daffodils near the fence, Clara heard the soft buzz of her phone in her apron pocket. A new notification. Location sharing enabled with Matthew. Active. It wasn't fear at first. It was something quieter, a hush beneath the ribs. She looked down the street, empty. Even the breeze felt like it had stopped to listen. Clara tried not to think too much about it. Days passed like slow rain. The bruise faded, but something inside her didn't. She found herself talking less, not out of bitterness, but from a growing uncertainty in her own voice. Words seemed heavy now, like they might tip something fragile if said too loudly. She stopped calling Rachel, stopped journaling, stopped humming in the kitchen. There was a quiet moment one afternoon, just before the sun dipped below. She didn't know she was doing wrong. How she held the knife when chopping onions. The way she laughed too loudly when the grocery clerk made a joke. How she lingered at the market too long. "You don't need to be so friendly with strangers," he muttered one evening. "It's not safe." Clara nodded, tucked her hair behind her ear, and swallowed the protest she hadn't formed yet. The phone stayed in her pocket now, even in the garden, even in the bathroom. She began to speak more with her eyes. A glance at the window, a long stare at the fence line, a lingering look at the unopened mailbox. One night, unable to sleep, she tiptoed to the living room. The blinds were half open. Clara stood in the soft light, watching the sidewalk outside. A couple passed by, their arms linked, laughter trailing behind them like perfume. It was a brief, ordinary moment, but it felt like a dream from another life. She turned toward the window's reflection. Her own figure stood there, pale and blurry in the glass. Not quite her. Not quite someone else. Behind her, the hallway stretched dark and narrow. And in the silence, she whispered something she hadn't said aloud in a long, long time. "I miss me." Every morning at exactly 6:45, Eleanor Price poured hot water over Earl Grey leaves in her porcelain teapot and stepped out onto her porch with a shawl over her shoulders. Her house sat directly across from the Jennings Reid place, same street, same church pew, same Christmas cookies delivered every December. And though Eleanor never said it aloud, she'd started watching the house more closely after the wedding. She noticed small things. The way Clara's garden began to wilt, as if the flowers were grieving. How the bright red bicycle she'd once seen Clara ride to school had disappeared. How she no longer wore yellow. Eleanor was no busybody. She'd seen enough life to know when not to meddle. But sometimes she caught sight of Clara, just a flicker of her through the kitchen window, and her heart pinched like an old clothespin left out in the rain too long. One Tuesday, while Eleanor clipped begonias by the fence, she saw Matthew's truck pull into the driveway harder than usual. The door slammed. A pause. Then Clara stepped out of the house. No shoes, no cardigan, arms tightly crossed. Even from across the street, Eleanor could feel the cold in that body language. But Clara lifted one hand in a half-wave and smiled. A smile that didn't touch her eyes. Inside her own home, Eleanor stood by the sink and stared out the window. Her fingers gripped the porcelain cup tighter. "Lord," she whispered, "if something's wrong, send someone wiser than me." She didn't call, didn't cross the street. But she did light a candle beside the photo of her late husband and prayed longer than usual that night. Across the street, Clara sat on the edge of the empty bathtub, the faucet dripping beside her in slow, irregular taps. Her hair was damp, her arms wrapped around her knees. The bathroom door was locked, not that it mattered. It wasn't that Matthew was always cruel. Sometimes he was kind. Sometimes he made coffee with cinnamon the way she liked, or played old Sinatra records while cooking breakfast. But then came the shifts, the moods, the silence that wasn't really silence, the words laced in sugar but sharpened like glass. Clara pressed her forehead against the tiled wall, the coolness grounding her. Her breath came in slow, careful pulls. "I don't know who I am anymore," she whispered. The faucet kept dripping. Eleanor set out a plate of lemon bars on her windowsill the next morning, an old tradition for neighbors passing by, but no one took them. She thought briefly about writing Clara a note, just something kind, something like, "I'm here. But she didn't. Instead, she folded her hands in prayer and told herself Clara was just adjusting. That marriages took time. That Clara had always been quiet. That maybe it wasn't her place. She was 74. What could she possibly do? So she watched and prayed and waited. Inside the Jennings-Reid house, Clara opened the fridge, saw nothing she wanted, and closed it again. She stared at her phone on the counter. A message from her sister, unopened, 10 days old. Her fingers hovered above it, then dropped. In the hallway, she heard Matthew's footsteps. Even when he wasn't home, she heard them, felt them in the floorboards, like the echo of something she couldn't quite escape. Clara glanced at the front window. The curtains were drawn, but for a moment she imagined them open, imagined Eleanor's eyes meeting hers, imagined walking across the street barefoot with no suitcase, no explanation, just needing out. But then she heard the lock on the front door turn, and the curtains stayed closed. The envelope arrived on a Thursday afternoon, slipped discreetly between catalogs and electric bills. Clara recognized the handwriting before she even touched it. The curves of the R in Rachel, the way she always dotted her I's with a slight upward slant. She didn't open it right away. She waited until she was alone, really alone, with Matthew at the hardware store and the neighbor's lawnmower humming like white noise across the street. Clara sat on the edge of their bed, hands trembling as she broke the seal with her nail. Inside, a single folded page, a Greyhound bus ticket tucked inside, and 2 crisp $100 bills. Her sister's handwriting was uneven, rushed but tender. Clara, no questions, no judgment. Just come. You don't owe me anything. You don't owe him anything either. The 10:35 bus from Hillcrest leaves every morning. It's safe. I'll be waiting at the other end. I love you. Rach. Clara didn't cry. Years of humidity and neglect. She pulled up the loose floorboard, the same one she used to stash love notes and extra pencils back when she was still a teacher, with a room full of sticky fingers and butterfly drawings. She slid the letter, money, and ticket into a plastic bag, pressed it deep into the hollow beneath the wood, and gently replaced the board. Then she sat there for a long time. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that isn't peace, just absence. She stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. The smudge of a bruise on her jaw had faded, but she still tilted her face to one side out of habit. Her fingers touched the edge of the sink. She wasn't imagining it. She wasn't crazy. Someone had seen her. Someone still loved her. That was the most dangerous part. That night, she cooked Matthew's favorite meal, baked lemon chicken with rosemary and roasted garlic potatoes. She chopped slowly, carefully, measuring out everything to the exact pinch, the way he preferred it. Her hands shook when she lit the stove. The scent of rosemary filled the kitchen, sharp and warm. When he came through the door, the look on his face softened. "You're glowing tonight," he said, kissing her on the cheek like nothing had ever been wrong. Clara smiled, too wide, too practiced. She poured him wine, sat across from him, laughed at his jokes. When he complimented her mashed potatoes, she thanked him like a child receiving a sticker. "You know," he said, after wiping his mouth, "things are better when we're like this, when you try." She nodded. "Yes," she whispered, "much better." After dinner, while he watched television with a beer balanced on his belly, Clara stood by the kitchen sink, her hands in dishwater, her eyes distant. She didn't look at the window, didn't look at the clock. She only thought about the space beneath the floorboard, and how $200 and a one-way ticket were resting inches above the earth. Hope. Terrifying, electric hope. It beat like a second pulse beneath her ribs. It was the sound of the door closing, not slamming, just quietly clicking shut, that made Clara's blood run cold. It was too early. She hadn't heard the truck in the driveway. No gravel crunching, no footsteps, just the sudden finality of the lock sliding home. "Clara," Matthew's voice came low and calm from the hallway. "You got a letter." Her hand froze above the sink. Water ran over her fingers, warm and relentless, like time refusing to pause. She turned, slowly, her heart thudding so hard it echoed in her ears. He stood by the kitchen entrance, holding the torn envelope in one hand, the folded letter in the other. The bus ticket was on the counter beside him, damp from his sweaty palm. She didn't speak. He didn't blink. "You lie." His tone hardened. "You think I wouldn't find it?" He stepped closer. The floorboards creaked under his boots. Clara instinctively stepped back, bumping into the corner of the dining table. "You don't even know what it's like out there," he growled. "Do you really think anyone's going to take you in? You think your sister actually gives a damn about you after all this time?" She opened her mouth to answer, but he was already moving. The first shove sent her staggering into the wall, her shoulder striking the light switch. The room blinked dark, then lit again. A dish on the counter crashed to the floor, shards of ceramic scattered at her feet. He grabbed her wrist, the same one he'd bruised before. "You ungrateful little—" She yanked away, the movement clumsy, desperate. Her arm struck a framed photo, their wedding picture. It fell, shattered, the glass slicing a thin line across her palm. Blood bloomed. "I gave you everything," he hissed. "I took care of you. I fed you. I kept you safe." "You caged me," Clara gasped. "You erased me." Wrong answer. He slapped her, open palm, backhand, hard enough that her head snapped sideways. The room tilted. She hit the floor. And for a few seconds, everything went silent except the roaring in her ears and the soft drip-drip of her own blood hitting tile. Somewhere in the chaos, the television in the living room kept playing, a sitcom laugh track clashing violently with the destruction unfolding in the kitchen. Clara tried to stand. Her leg buckled. Matthew paced behind her now, his breath heavy. "Do you even understand what you've done?" She didn't respond. "I could have made you disappear for real. Don't think I don't have the friends to make that happen." She reached for the cabinet handle, pulled herself up, hand leaving a red smear against the door. "Get back here," he said, stepping toward her again. But this time, she screamed. It wasn't loud, it wasn't heroic, but it was sharp, raw, a sound that hadn't left her throat in months. The kind of cry a woman makes when something inside her finally snaps free. Matthew froze, just long enough for her to lurch forward, stumbling past him, knocking the bus ticket off the counter as she went. She ran to the bathroom, locked the door. Her breath came in ragged gasps. Her hands shook as she pressed a towel to the cut on her palm. Through the door, he pounded once, twice, then silence. The floorboard beside her foot remained shut, but she could feel it. The secret inside it still there, still waiting. She pressed her forehead to the cool tile wall, whispering to no one, "I'm not staying. Not one more day." Quiet white house at the end of Sycamore Lane, the house with the wind chimes that hadn't sung in months. Her scream tore through the silence. "Help me!" she screamed again, louder, desperate, broken. "Someone, please, he's going to kill me." Windows lined both sides of the street. Behind them, lives, dinners, television shows, safety. She saw curtains twitch, the light blink of a lamp being turned off. But no doors opened, no footsteps approached. Sycamore Lane, the place where neighbors once smiled and brought casseroles, had become an unspoken graveyard of glances and guilt. People saw. They always had. But they chose not to see clearly. She backed against the porch column, eyes scanning the shadows, willing someone, anyone, to step outside. Then she felt it, a jerk, sharp and cruel, as Matthew grabbed a fistful of her hair and yanked her backwards like a rag doll. Her scream snapped into silence. He dragged her across the porch floor, one arm coiled around her neck. "You want an audience now?" he hissed. "That what this is?" She clawed at his arm, kicked, but the world had shrunk down to his breath against her ear and the scrape of splinters on her calves. "I told you," he whispered. "You leave me, you don't walk away." She couldn't breathe, she couldn't think, and for the first time since she married him, Clara believed she was going to die. Across town, just off Main and Cedar, a patrol cruiser sat idling near the town square, half-shadowed beneath the leafless branches of an old elm. Officer Gabe Whitaker sat inside, biting into a turkey sandwich, his sleeves rolled up, his radio tuned low. Beside him, sprawled in the passenger seat, like he owned the vehicle, was Arlo, his German Shepherd canine partner, muzzle resting on his massive paws, ears occasionally twitching. "You know," Gabe said between bites, "you've got it pretty good. No paperwork, no in-laws, just ride along and get belly rubs." Arlo huffed through his nose, unimpressed. Gabe chuckled and reached over to scratch behind the dog's ear. Then Arlo's head jerked up, ears pricked. He growled, low and guttural. Gabe's smile faded. He set the sandwich down. "What is it, boy?" Arlo barked once, sharp and alert. The radio crackled, static, then dispatch. "Possible domestic disturbance, Sycamore Lane, female screaming, caller disconnected." Gabe was already shifting gears. Back on Sycamore Lane, Clara hit the floor hard as Matthew threw her against the living room rug. Her cheek scraped the weave. She coughed, sobbed, tried to crawl. "You embarrassed me," he spat, "in front of the whole street." She didn't answer. She couldn't. He grabbed her by the ankle and dragged her back toward him. And then, sirens, not loud, not yet close, but enough to pause his hand. Clara's head jerked up. Her eyes met his, and for one fragile second, hope, that old, fragile thing she'd buried. "Don't move," Matthew hissed. But her body betrayed her. She pushed up with trembling arms and screamed again. "Help!" Matthew lunged. Outside, a patrol car screeched to a stop. The front door flew open, and Officer Gabe Whitaker stepped in, weapon drawn, Arlo beside him. The turkey sandwich was still warm in Gabe's hand when the dispatch came through. A clipped voice, tense. "Possible domestic in progress. Female screaming. 412 Sycamore Lane. Caller disconnected." Gabe's foot hit the gas before the message finished. Arlo was already up, eyes locked, posture rigid. But what happened next startled even Gabe. Before he could set the sandwich down, Arlo gave a sharp, guttural bark, then leapt across the console, pawed the driver's window with such force it rattled in its frame. "Easy, boy! We're going! Hang on!" But Arlo didn't wait. With one clean motion, he launched himself out of the half-cracked window like a missile. "Arlo!" Gabe shouted. But the shepherd was already gone, a blur of black and tan across Main Street, dodging traffic, tearing through a hedge, heading toward Sycamore Lane like a creature summoned by something older than training. Something primal. Something that smelled like fear. Clara's blood had stained the edge of the coffee table. Her arms curled around her ribs, her breath shallow and ragged. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out anymore. Matthew circled her, panting, eyes wide, hands twitching. "Stupid girl," he muttered. "Could have had it all, could have been safe." She didn't lift her head, didn't speak. But a sound began to grow behind the house. Footsteps? No, pounding. Something was coming. Matthew froze, then a crash. The backyard gate splintered open, and from the trees beyond the fence line came the shape of something powerful and alive. It leapt the back porch in a single bound. Matthew turned too late. Arlo hit him like a hammer. The shepherd didn't maul or bite. He didn't need to. He simply knocked the man back hard enough to send him crashing into the old coat rack, which toppled like a tree. Then Arlo turned, body square, head lowered, hackles raised, and placed himself between Clara and the man still groaning on the floor. He didn't growl, not yet. He didn't move. He just stood there, watching, waiting, protecting. Clara blinked, unsure if what she was seeing was real. The German shepherd's eyes met hers for just a moment. Not aggressive, not wild, just steady. And in that stillness, Clara felt something she hadn't tasted in years: safety. Then, the front door slammed open. Boots pounded in. "Arlo!" Gabe's voice was sharp, urgent. He raised his weapon as he entered, sweeping left, sweeping right. His eyes landed on the scene. The shattered vase, the blood, the woman on the floor, the man crawling back with a look of stunned disbelief. And Arlo, silent, watchful, a scent drawn. "Don't move." Matthew didn't. Maybe he couldn't. A minute later, backup arrived. Matthew was loaded into a squad car, face bruised, muttering curses through cracked lips. Inside the house, Gabe knelt beside Clara. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Clara nodded slowly, but her eyes were on Arlo. The dog had moved closer now, his head low near her elbow, tail still, breath calm. She reached a trembling hand toward him, hesitated, then let her fingers brush the fur behind his ear. He didn't flinch. Neither did she. "Good boy," she whispered, voice hoarse. It wasn't much, but it was more strength than she'd found in herself in a very long time. The porch door was still swinging on its hinges when Officer Gabe Whitaker stepped through with his service weapon drawn. Snowflakes clung to his uniform. His breath fogged the entryway, but his voice was steel. "Back away, sir, now. Hands where I can see them." Matthew Reed froze mid-step, one hand still clenched in the air, as if he hadn't decided whether to strike or to soothe. His shirt was streaked with blood, not his own, and his jaw twitched like a live wire. But he didn't move, not because of Gabe's weapon, but because of the thing standing between him and the woman on the floor. Arlo, the German shepherd, didn't bark. Didn't lunge. He simply stood with one broad paw forward, his chest shielding Clara's collapsed body, his amber eyes fixed on Matthew's every twitch like a trigger about to break. Matthew dared a smirk. "This is a misunderstanding," he said, slicking his damp hair back with one trembling hand. "My wife is, she's emotional. We just had a marital—" "Don't," Gabe cut in, moving closer. "Don't finish that sentence unless you want to say it under oath." He nodded toward Clara. "She's bleeding. You think that looks like emotion?" Matthew's mouth opened, closed. Still, Gabe didn't lower his weapon. "Step back, away." Clara made a sound, more breath than word, as if her lungs were relearning how to function. She was curled against the side table, the skin around her left eye already darkening, lips cracked, wrists bruised. One leg shook involuntarily. Her breath came in stutters, hiccups, but Arlo was still there, a statue. When she moved, barely, a flinch, Arlo shifted just slightly, adjusting his body to block more of her from view. It was like watching a living wall form in slow motion. "Ma'am," Gabe said, his tone softening. "I'm Officer Whitaker. I'm here to help. Are you able to speak?" Clara blinked at him. Her lips parted. Then she saw Matthew's hand twitch again, and she flinched. Gabe saw it too. "Have a right to be here." Gabe didn't blink. "She has the right to feel safe in it, which she clearly isn't." Then louder, "Dispatch, this is Unit 14. Suspect is contained, female injured and conscious. Need medical backup at 412 Sycamore and requesting immediate assistance to detain male. Canine deployed and stable. Over." The silence that followed was thick and strange. Outside, a neighbor's door creaked, but no one stepped out. No one ever did. Gabe holstered his weapon just enough to pull cuffs from his belt. He approached Matthew slowly. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." Matthew didn't move. "Now!" There was a pause. Then the slow grind of leather soles on hardwood. Cuffs closed around Matthew's wrists like punctuation marks. Even then, he wouldn't stop talking. "She's unstable. Ask anyone. She quit her job, barely leaves the house, has these episodes." He craned his neck toward Clara. "You gonna tell them the truth, baby? Or just the story you want to sell?" Clara didn't answer, but Arlo growled, low, from somewhere deep in his chest. Gabe put a hand on Arlo's scruff, calming but firm. "Good boy," he whispered. "She doesn't have to say a damn word." He looked at Matthew. "But you just did." Paramedics arrived 3 minutes later. Clara wouldn't let them touch her until they asked permission from Arlo, who hadn't moved from her side. One medic, a young woman named Shayna, knelt beside the shepherd and held out her hand. "Hey, big guy, I'm just here to help." Arlo looked at Clara. Clara, with trembling fingers, touched his shoulder. "It's okay," she whispered. I think I'm safe now." Arlo stepped back. Only then did Clara begin to cry. Not the gasping, terrified sobs of panic, but the kind that come from something long stored and finally spilling. She let them take her vitals, let them bandage her temple, let them lift her into the ambulance. And through it all, Arlo never left the steps. Until Gabe said softly, "Come on, partner, she needs us." And Arlo climbed in after her. It should have been over. Clara sat trembling on the ambulance step, her fingertips still sticky with her own blood. Gabe stood nearby, writing notes into his pad, checking details with the EMTs. Arlo paced once in a circle at her feet and sat again, ears perked, body rigid. The street was strangely still for late afternoon, only the faint rustle of bare branches above and the metallic hum of the engine. "No!" Gabe shouted, but he wasn't fast enough. Arlo was. The German shepherd shot forward with the force of a bullet, claws tearing into the grass. In midair, he twisted to protect Clara, then landed between her and Matthew like a wall of muscle and instinct. His jaws clamped down, not to tear, but to halt. Matthew screamed, a short, high-pitched sound not of pain, but shock. Arlo's teeth were locked around his forearm, just tight enough to stop him cold. Blood didn't spill, bone didn't break, but the sheer weight of the shepherd's body knocked Matthew flat on the walkway. He gasped. Arlo didn't growl, didn't blink. He simply held, still, commanding, silent. A warning made of flesh and fury. Clara backed away, her breath hitching. Gabe reached him seconds later, pulling Matthew's other arm behind his back again, pressing his knee into the man's shoulder. "You just bought yourself a second set of charges," Gabe muttered. "You idiot." Matthew thrashed once. "Get this dog off me. He's out of control. He's the only reason you didn't break her neck," Gabe snapped. "So you might want to be quiet before he changes his mind." He looked down at Arlo. "Release." The shepherd hesitated. Then slowly, as if making a point, he opened his jaw and stepped back, but didn't sit, didn't look away. His eyes stayed fixed on Matthew like he was memorizing him. Gabe cuffed him tighter. "You're under arrest for domestic battery, assault, resisting, and attempting to violate a restraining order I'm about to help her file. Anything else you want to add?" Matthew's voice was gone. Just breath, rage, defeat. The street was no longer silent. Mrs. Eleanor Price stepped out from her porch in her bathrobe, hand trembling on the railing. Two teenagers stood near their fence, whispering, and then others. Faces appeared, hesitant, some ashamed, but present for the first time. As Gabe led Matthew toward the squad car, the man shouted back over his shoulder, "This isn't over. You're nothing without me, Clara. You were nothing before me." Clara didn't answer, but Arlo growled, low, warning. Matthew stumbled. The sound of the car door slamming shut was a punctuation mark Clara didn't know she needed. One of the EMTs handed her a water bottle. Another offered to escort her to the hospital, but Clara just shook her head. "I want to ride with him," she said, voice barely above a whisper, reaching to touch Arlo's ear. He saved me." Gabe nodded. "Let's get you out of here." They walked slowly toward the cruiser. Arlo stayed glued to her side, strap on her blouse, the way her hand trembled as it stroked Arlo's fur. "I think he already tried," he said gently, "and I think you survived." Clara looked down, then almost to herself. "I don't know who I am without fear." Arlo nudged her leg. "You're someone worth protecting," Gabe said. "That's a start." The blinds in Sheriff Walter's office were drawn halfway, slicing the late afternoon sunlight into cold stripes across the desk. Dust hung in the air like suspended silence. Caleb Merrick stood just inside the doorway, holding a manila folder thick with printouts, time-stamps, and grainy photos he'd enlarged the night before. His jaw clenched tighter with each second the sheriff spent not looking up from his coffee. Walters finally sighed and set the mug down with a slow, deliberate clink. "You've been quiet for 2 weeks, Caleb. Thought we'd finally found our rhythm." Caleb didn't smile. "That's because I've been working. I need you to see this." He stepped forward, laying the folder on the desk between them like a courtroom exhibit. His hands didn't tremble, but the veins in his forearms flexed with restraint. 5 unexplained visits, same truck, same man, 2 different school parking lots, no known connection to any enrolled child. Walters flipped the folder open with the indifference of someone already convinced it meant nothing. "Derek Langston," Caleb added, jaw tightening. "He's not just some guy with tools. He was fired from 3 school contracts in 2 counties, quiet payouts, 1 teacher, she left town, no statement." Walters barely blinked. "You got audio?" "No, but I have timestamps, vehicle plates, witnesses willing to speak if we press. And Clara," Walters said slowly, holding up a finger, "was just rescued from her husband. You're telling me now she's a target of someone else entirely. Someone you happen to suspect but can't pin." Caleb exhaled. "I'm telling you it's not over. And this guy, Langston, has connections that don't make sense. Plumbing licenses in towns where he never worked. His name comes up in construction permits tied to school security bids. He's not listed as a contractor, but he signs for equipment. Something's wrong." Walters closed the folder. "You want me to greenlight a tail, a warrant, maybe a press inquiry, based on vibes and a few sketchy receipts?" "No," Caleb said flatly. "I want permission to place eyes on him, quiet surveillance, just enough to connect the dots without tipping him off. Give me someone from the rotation. Arlo and I can do the rest." The silence stretched. Outside, the dispatch radio crackled with background chatter from another unit. Walters rubbed the side of his face, eyes distant. "You were good in the service. You're good here too, but sometimes I think that mind of yours is still back in Fallujah, seeing bombs in backpacks, spies in grocery clerks." Caleb's voice was calm. "You're not listening." "I am listening. I just don't hear proof." They stared at each other. A veteran and a politician, one searching for patterns in the dark, the other waiting for daylight and permission. Walters finally leaned back. "You can have Sergeant Jimenez for 2 evenings. No wire, no GPS taps, no door knocking. You see something? You call me first, not the paper, not Clara, not anyone else." Caleb nodded once, stiffly. Understood. But he didn't pick up the folder. He left it there, centered on the desk. The hallway outside the sheriff's office felt colder. Caleb walked past the break room without acknowledging the deputies seated inside. No jokes today. No nods. Arlo waited by the cruiser, sitting still as stone. The German shepherd's ears twitched as Caleb approached. The leash hung loose from Caleb's hand, but Arlo didn't need it. His eyes searched his partner's face, reading disappointment before scent could confirm it. "They don't see it," Caleb muttered. "But you do, don't you?" Arlo let out a soft huff. A pause. Then Caleb gave a small nod, as if answering something unspoken between them. "We keep going. Quiet." He opened the back door, and Arlo hopped in without sound. The engine started low and steady, like a hum beneath his ribs. That night, Caleb sat in his modest living room, lights dim, laptop open on the coffee table. Printouts were spread across the floor. Arlo rested nearby, but his eyes didn't close. He was alert, watching Caleb the way soldiers watch over those too tired to keep watch themselves. The pattern was there. Names on equipment orders that didn't exist. Phone numbers that dead-end into prepaid cards. A hollow network built on invisible scaffolding. Caleb highlighted one school's name, then another. Same signature initials. Same approval codes. Signed 3 minutes apart in counties 2 hours away. Arlo shifted, then stood. A soft, sharp whine. Caleb turned. Arlo was staring at the front window. Outside, a white pickup truck cruised past slowly. No headlights, just shadows drifting. Too quiet for this neighborhood. Caleb stood, walking to the window without a word. His hand hovered over the light switch, then stopped. No license plate visible, no decals, just enough to leave a trace in memory. Gone now, but not unnoticed. Caleb sat back down, this time on the floor, beside Arlo. He scratched the shepherd's ears, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tomorrow," he said, "we begin again." Arlo rested his head on Caleb's knee, in the silence, too battered like a ghost from a gentler world. But just outside the lobby doors, a different presence waited. Arlo sat perfectly still beneath the courtyard maple, his chest rising and falling in slow, patient rhythm. His ears twitched occasionally, catching the buzz of street noise, the shifting breeze, the distant rattle of a gurney wheel on linoleum. But his eyes never left the glass doors. Gabe had tried to take him home, twice. "Nobody," he'd said softly, tugging on the leash. "We did our part. It's time to let the doctors—" But Arlo hadn't moved, not even a step. When Gabe finally unhooked the leash, the shepherd had laid down with a heavy thud and placed his head on his paws. Silent protest in the most loyal form. It wasn't defiance, it was devotion. "He's been like that for 6 hours, murmured the nurse behind the counter. "Wouldn't eat, wouldn't drink." The social worker, a thin woman with wind-chapped hands, glanced toward the courtyard where the dog waited beneath fading amber light. She hesitated, then made a call. Clara hadn't asked for visitors. She hadn't even looked anyone in the eye since waking up with stitches in her forehead and shadows stitched deeper in her chest. The bruises were changing color now, softening to greens and yellows, but her voice hadn't returned with them. Only nods, only whispers. But when the nurse appeared at her door and gently said, "There's someone asking for you. He's waiting outside," something flickered across her face. Not fear, not joy, something between memory and ache, a ripple. "Only for a few minutes," the nurse said softly, "in the garden, just you and him." The sun was just beginning to bleed into the horizon when Clara stepped barefoot onto the courtyard flagstones, her hospital socks quiet against the concrete. A pale sweater wrapped loosely around her shoulders like a borrowed hug. She stopped just before the last row of benches, and there he was. Arlo rose slowly from the base of the maple, ears back, body low, not in submission, but in gentleness, in reverence. He didn't approach immediately. He waited. Clara stood still. Her hands trembled, fingers wrapped around the sleeves of her sweater. They hadn't seen each other since that night. The screaming, the porch light, the silence that followed. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding and took one step, then another, and another. Arlo didn't move until she was just within reach. Only then did he inch forward, closing the space with a grace that didn't belong to his size. His nose hovered an inch from her palm, then dipped lower, resting near her knee, as if asking, and the dog beneath a tree shedding golden leaves that didn't need to be swept up just yet. "Everyone heard me scream," she whispered. Her voice was thin, barely there, like wind brushing against a cracked window. "But you were the only one who came." Arlo let out a low exhale, not a whine, but the sound a soul makes when it recognizes something fragile being said aloud for the first time. Clara rested her forehead against his. "I was so sure no one would believe me." And then, like it had been waiting behind her ribs for too long, the first sob came, soft, then stronger. Her hand still knotted in his fur. Arlo didn't flinch, didn't move. He simply leaned in closer, placing one paw carefully, gently, on the bench beside her thigh. As if anchoring her there, as if to say, "I'm here, you're still here too." From the glass door, Gabe watched silently. He didn't interrupt, didn't walk over. This was not his moment, this was theirs. The garden didn't have much, a few planters, a bench, the old maple, but that night it felt like a sanctuary built for two. And as the shadows lengthened across the tiles, the woman in the borrowed sweater and the German shepherd who never forgot became something more than survivor and savior. They became a tether, two halves of the same rescue. The garden had fallen into that quiet hour when the light slips into blue, not quite night, not yet gone. The air smelled faintly of chamomile from the nearby planters, though most of the blooms had already curled into sleep. Clara sat unmoving, her hands still buried in Arlo's thick fur. She hadn't realized how tightly she'd been holding on until her fingers began to ache. Her body had stopped trembling. Her voice had gone silent again, not in fear this time, but in the hollow space that sometimes follows grief when it's finally been spoken aloud. Arlo had shifted only once, just enough to nudge her knee with his snout when she'd begun to cry. He hadn't barked, hadn't moved away. He just stayed, solid, still, warm. Gabe stepped out quietly, not wanting to disturb the fragile stillness. He paused at the threshold of the courtyard, waiting for her to acknowledge him, not because he needed her permission, but because something about Clara deserved to never be startled again. She lifted her gaze after a moment. Her eyes were red, but steady. "You all right?" he asked gently. She nodded once. Then her voice, small and rasped, said, "I felt safe with him." It was the kind of sentence that shouldn't have needed saying, but coming from her, it felt like sacred ground. Gabe didn't interrupt. Clara looked back at Arlo, who now had one paw resting lightly on her foot. "I didn't even know I could still feel that," she whispered. "Safe." Gabe crouched a few feet away, arms resting on his knees. He didn't press, didn't pry. Anything, he said, but the hospital's discharging you tomorrow, and I figured if you'd rather not go back to that house just yet. Clara's expression tensed, as if the word house carried weight. There's a spare room at mine, Gabe continued. You can stay a few nights. I'll be out on duty most days. You wouldn't even have to see me if you didn't want to. And Arlo, he looked at the dog with a soft smile. Well, I get the feeling he's already made up his mind. Arlo gave a low chuff in response, not a bark, just a sound that felt like an agreement between old souls. Clara didn't answer right away. She looked at her hands, at the way they no longer shook, at the faint impressions her fingers had left in Arlo's fur, like proof that she'd been here and that someone had stayed through the storm with her. You wouldn't mind? She asked, voice barely above the rustling leaves. No, ma'am, Gabe said, not even a little. And Arlo? Gabe looked at the dog, who had now rested his head gently on her lap, claiming her without possession. He's yours as long as you need him to be. Clara exhaled, shaky but whole. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, she wasn't choosing out of fear or strategy or survival. She was choosing because something inside her whispered, "You're allowed to want softness again." "Just a few nights," she said. "Of course," Gabe nodded. Clara ran her hand gently down Arlo's back. "I'm not good company right now." "You don't need to be," Gabe replied. "You just need to be somewhere safe, that's all." They sat there a few minutes more, letting the dark come slowly. Somewhere in the distance, a wind chime tinkled. A nurse wheeled out an empty chair and forgot to take it back. But here, in this square of courtyard carved out of steel and sorrow, the world felt briefly merciful. Clara stood slowly. Arlo rose with her like a shadow stretching upward. She reached for the leash Gabe offered, but hesitated. "Can he walk beside me?" Gabe nodded, loosening the loop and handing her the slack line. "He'll match your pace." They walked together down the corridor. Woman, dog, and the man who had offered no judgment, only room to breathe. No one stared, no one asked, and for the first time since her wedding ring slid onto her finger, Clara felt like she was walking somewhere not out of obligation or danger, but toward something unknown, maybe even kind. The room smelled faintly of cedar and old books, not from neglect, but from history, like someone had lived gently here once and left pieces of peace behind. Clara stood in the doorway, fingers curled lightly around the frame. Her eyes scanned the space, a simple twin bed with a faded blue quilt, a small dresser with one drawer slightly off track, and a nightstand with a chipped lamp that hummed when turned on. The window was half cracked to let in the cool air, and a jar of fresh water sat beside the bed, like someone had thought ahead and cared. She didn't speak, not when Gabe said goodnight from the hallway with a quiet, "Take your time and let me know if you need anything." Not when Arlo padded over and settled down directly outside her door, letting out one of those long, low exhales that sounded like the wind itself resigning. And especially not when she closed the door, gently, without force, and turned the small bronze lock with a soft click. It wasn't just a lock. It was a boundary. It was a sentence rewritten. She stood for a long while, hands still resting on the knob, listening. Listening not for footsteps thundering up the hall, or the sharp edge of her name barked in accusation, but for the absence of threat, the absence of fear. The quiet was so complete it felt like a balm. Clara exhaled, and it shook on the way out, the way it does when a body has forgotten what silence without danger feels like. She moved slowly, as if unsure she was allowed to. The floor creaked, but no voice followed. No door slammed. No cold remark chased after her heels. Just creaks and wood and an old house that didn't ask anything of her. She sat on the bed, placed her palms flat on the quilt, then pulled her legs beneath her and cried. Not loudly, not from pain, but from release. The kind of cry that leaks from the corners of the eyes and runs slowly toward the chin. Not violent, not desperate, just the unraveling of knots tied too tight for too long. Arlo's ears twitched from the other side of the door. He didn't bark, didn't scratch. He just listened and stayed. That, more than anything, broke something open in her chest. She pressed her forehead against the wood and whispered, "Thank you." She didn't expect him to understand, but a soft thump of his tail tapped against the floor, slow and steady, and it felt like an answer. Clara crawled back into bed and pulled the blanket up to her chin. She left the lamp on, not because she feared the dark, but because she was still learning that this particular night wouldn't turn on her. The silence deepened, but it was a different kind of silence now. No tightness in her lungs, no rehearsing explanations in her mind, no listening for the weight of footsteps in the hallway or glass breaking in the kitchen. Just the hum of the lamp, the steady breath of a German shepherd behind the door, and the first night she could remember where her body did not sleep in fragments. She didn't dream, not really. There were moments of flicker, soft hands, the smell of cinnamon, someone humming low and warm, but nothing sharp, nothing screaming. She stirred once around 2:40 a.m., heart beating fast from a half-forgotten sound that turned out to be just the wind. Her eyes snapped open, was locked. Her hand went still. Outside, she heard the faintest shuffle. Arlo had risen, padded once in a slow circle, and returned to his post. She whispered again, this time softer than before. "Still there." Another soft thump of tail on wood. She smiled, despite herself. By the time the sun began to stretch its fingers across the windowsill, pale, golden, unthreatening, Clara was still asleep. One hand curled loosely over her heart, the other resting on the pillow beside her, as if reaching for someone she could finally trust. Outside the door, Arlo stirred only when he heard the first yawn. He rose, stretched, and sat patiently, waiting, not for orders, but for permission. And somewhere, quietly, the fear began to loosen its grip. The courthouse smelled like old wood, disinfectant, and nerves. Clara stood in front of the mirror in the women's restroom, clutching the sink as if it were the only thing tethering her to the floor. Her blouse was buttoned all the way up, hair tied back, no jewelry, no color, just pale fabric, trembling breath, and a woman who had come too far to fall apart now. Outside, the murmur of attorneys and bailiffs hummed like a storm cloud preparing to break. She hadn't eaten since yesterday. Couldn't. The thought of food made her nauseous. Gabe had offered to drive her, to wait outside, to walk in with her even, but she'd said no. Some battles had to be walked into alone, or at least looked like they were. Her palms were sweating. She wiped them against her skirt and tried to remember what the counselor had told her. "You are not on trial. Your truth is." But inside the courtroom, that didn't feel true at all. When the doors opened, Clara stepped in like a ghost, returning to a life she hadn't asked to leave. Eyes followed her. The press, the public, strangers whose curiosity was sharper than their empathy. And there he was. James Matthew Whitmore. Hair combed, suit pressed, face calm. The same man, who once whispered promises across her pillow, now sat behind a defense table, flanked by attorneys who hadn't lived a second in that house, but were ready to tear apart every minute she had. When the judge asked for a plea, Matthew stood.
"Not guilty, Your Honor."
Clara didn't flinch, not outwardly. But inside her ribs, something folded. The defense wasted no time. They were good at what they did. Not cruel, just calculated.
"Mrs. Whitmore, would you say you are emotional by nature?"
Is it true you isolated yourself from friends and family after marriage?
"You say he hurt you, but there are no hospital records from the first few months, are there?"
She didn't leave, ladies and gentlemen. Not until he discovered the letter.
Words sliced like razors. Eyes. By the time cross-examination came, Clara was unraveling. Her voice wavered. She stumbled over the timeline. Her hands shook, and the prosecutor tried to redirect. But the damage had already begun. One misremembered date, one pause too long, one shaky breath, and suddenly she looked less like a survivor and more like someone unsure. Then it happened. A soft shuffle. She didn't look at first. She was staring down, trying to breathe through the rising static in her ears. But then she heard the faintest huff, familiar, grounding. She lifted her eyes, and there he was, Arlo, sitting in the back of the courtroom, head high, eyes locked on hers with the steadiness of an anchor in storm tide. He didn't bark. He didn't move. He didn't have to. His presence said what no lawyer could. I was there. I saw. I stood between you and the worst of him. And I am still here. Clara inhaled, slow and deep, and for the first time in that room, her shoulders dropped. The defense asked another question. This time, she didn't falter. Did you exaggerate the extent of your injuries, Mrs. Whitmore? Clara looked at the man who asked, then at the man who'd caused them, then at the dog who had stood between them both. No, I did not. The lawyer blinked. You seem more confident now. She nodded. I remembered who I was. Later, when court recessed for the day, Clara didn't rush out. She walked past the benches, heels clicking with quiet resolve. Arlo was waiting by the door with Gabe, leash in hand. Clara knelt beside him and touched his fur, not for comfort, but in gratitude. She didn't cry, not this time. Instead, she whispered what only Arlo could understand. I wasn't alone after all. The courtroom had never felt so still. Not when the judge banged the gavel, not during Matthew's plea, not even when the broken dishes from that night were displayed in evidence, each shard labeled and photographed like a silent scream on glossy paper. But now, with Clara on the stand, Arlo lying at her feet, the room held its breath. The bailiff had made an exception. Gabe had asked carefully, and the judge had weighed it against precedent and protocol, then nodded. If the animal can remain still and not distract, I'll allow it. Arlo had not moved since. He lay there like stone carved from loyalty, not restless, not asleep, just present, quiet, watching. Clara's hands clutched each other in her lap. Her blouse was the same soft cream she'd worn the day before, but today her hair was down. A gentle wave stand. She raised her hand, mimicking the stance, square shoulders, head low, eyes fixed. Arlo never barked, never growled, not unless he had to, but he would place himself between me and Matthew, like he'd drawn a line. Someone in the jury leaned forward. Another clasped their hands. Clara's voice was steadier now. There was a night. I don't even know why the fight started. Something about dinner being late or my tone or the way I looked at him. But it escalated fast. He threw my phone. I went to pick it up, and that's when he grabbed my arm. She paused, breathing once. The courtroom didn't move. I didn't scream. I didn't even cry. I just froze. But Arlo... Her voice caught. She reached down and brushed her fingers over the thick fur at her feet. Arlo stirred slightly but remained calm. Arlo stood between us. Just stood. That was all it took. Matthew stepped back. Didn't say another word. The prosecutor took a quiet step forward. Did Arlo ever receive formal training to do that? No, Clara smiled faintly. He was trained as a canine for search and rescue, not for domestic violence response, but he knew. Somehow, he just knew. Her hands relaxed. I used to think I imagined things, that I exaggerated them. But Arlo, he didn't need proof. He didn't ask questions or make me explain. He just listened, with his body, with his presence. She looked at the jury now, directly. Her words no longer whispered, they resonated. There were nights I sat on the bathroom floor, the door locked, and I'd cry into a towel so Matthew wouldn't hear. And through the crack under the door, Arlo would nudge his nose. Just once or twice, enough for me to know I wasn't invisible. A woman in the front row dabbed her eye. A man near the back wiped his glasses, though they were already clean. The prosecutor spoke softly. "Clara, why do you think that made such a difference?" Clara blinked. "Because he heard me when no one did." She looked down again. "And when the yelling stopped, when I couldn't tell anymore if it was my fault or if maybe I deserved it, Arlo still stayed. Even after Matthew locked him outside. Even after I tried to tell him to go away, to not get hurt. He waited. Every night, by the porch." She hesitated, voice cracking just slightly. "I think he knew I was dying. Not in body, but something inside me. And he wouldn't let me die alone." The courtroom was utterly still. Even the sound of the air vents had dulled, or maybe people were just too still to notice. One of the jurors had clasped her own arm where Clara's bruises once were. Another leaned forward, hands beneath his chin like a child listening to a bedtime story. One too real, too painful to end in dreams. The prosecutor asked one final question. "If you had never been rescued, do you think you would have left?" Clara didn't answer right away. She looked at Arlo. Then she nodded. Not fast, not certain, but honest. "No," she said softly. "But I think I would have started to want to. Because of him." Her voice was steady now. "He gave me the first yes after 1,000 silent no's. The first moment that made me believe I could step out. Not run, not hide, but rise." She exhaled. "I think that's what survivors need, not always words, just someone or something who stays." The judge called for recess, but no one stood right away. As the gavel fell, Clara bent and whispered into Arlo's ear. "You gave me my voice." Arlo blinked, slow and knowing, and that was enough. The courthouse corridors echoed with hushed speculation as the bailiff escorted the jury back into the box for the third and final time that afternoon. 42 hours of deliberation had carved fatigue into every face. Bloodshot eyes, rumpled jackets, half-finished cups of stale coffee lined up like failed negotiations on the jury room table. Clara sat rigid beside the prosecutor, fingers threaded so tightly her knuckles blanched. She tasted copper at the back of her throat and wondered distantly if fear could draw blood without breaking skin. Arlo lay at her feet, chin on crossed paws, breathing slow and deliberate, as if willing his calm into her through the floorboards. Judge Merriweather cleared his throat. "Madam Foreperson, has the jury reached a unanimous verdict?" The forewoman, a middle-aged librarian who'd wept during Clara's testimony, stood, clutching a folded sheet of paper like a confession. Her voice splintered on the opening syllable. "Your Honor, we remain hopelessly divided. We do not believe further deliberation will produce a verdict." A single gasp rippled from the gallery. It was Martha Wilson. Clara recognized the tremor of disappointed outrage. But the sound fell into a silence so complete it felt like the room itself stopped breathing. Clara's heart gave one violent thud, then seemed to float weightless inside her chest. Judge Merriweather's gavel struck wood. "This court declares a mistrial." The words rang out, clinical, official, final, yet strangely hollow, like church bells in a ghost town. James exhaled a quiet laugh. It wasn't loud, barely more than a rush of air, but Clara heard it as clearly as if he'd shouted. He straightened the cuffs of his tailored jacket, mouth curling into the kind of smile that once made her stomach flutter and now made her skin crawl. The bailiff unlocked his wrist shackles. Metal clinked, a liberation aria. James flecked of Clara's shoe, a silent tether that reminded her she still occupied space on solid ground. The courthouse security guards muttered about paperwork. The judge thanked the jurors and dismissed them with apologies. Reporters outside the double doors murmured into microphones about controversial outcome and shocking split decision. But Clara heard none of it, only the pulse in her ears and Arlo's steady breathing. Gabe materialized at her side. "I'm sorry," he whispered. 2 words, no embellishment, because what trite comfort could varnish this hollow? She nodded, unable to assemble a reply, every syllable crumbling to dust before it reached her tongue. James walked past, flanked by his attorneys. He didn't speak, but his cologne, once her favorite, lingered like an insult. Clara flinched at the sense ambush of memory. Wedding toasts, honeymoon breakfasts, rosemary simmering on a stove the night he first grabbed her wrist, hard enough to bruise. Arlo emitted a low, almost imperceptible rumble. Not a growl, a vibration, a living boundary line. James kept moving. Outside, camera shutters snapped. A reporter called James's name, asked how it felt. He gave the practiced half-smile of a man who knew public performance. "We're grateful to the jury for their thoughtful deliberation." His lawyer nudged him into a waiting SUV, door thudding shut before more questions could bloom. Rain began, thin needles on courthouse steps. Clara stepped beneath the columned portico, water stippling her cheeks like cold tears she hadn't yet shed. Around her, people dispersed, jurors seeking shelter, spectators clustering under umbrellas, the prosecutor promising appeals. But every voice seemed distant, tinny, as though filtered through cotton. Gabe touched her elbow. "We'll file for a retrial. DA's office is already drafting the paperwork. New jury, new strategy." She nodded again. The motions of hope felt heavy tonight, like lifting iron bars with tired arms. A black sedan idled at the curb, Gabe's patrol issue unmarked, and Arlo guided her toward it. Gentle nudge at the back of her calf. She slid into the back seat, the dog following and settling beside her on the vinyl, pressed against her leg so she wouldn't list into the dark. Halfway home, a sob finally cracked from somewhere deep. It startled her. She pressed a fist to her lips, as if to cram it back inside. But Arlo nudged under her hand, insisting she leave it be. She buried trembling fingers in the thick fur at his ruff. Warmth radiated into her palm. "Clara," Gabe said quietly from the driver's seat, eyes never leaving the rain-slick road. "This isn't the ending. It's..." Then back at her. His amber eyes didn't mirror her despair. They counted it. Calm, resolute, unstoppable. She realized then that devastation too could be shared, its weight halved by proximity. And Arlo, unmoved, unshaken, was anchor enough to keep her from drifting into that old sea of helplessness. By the time the car eased into Gabe's driveway, the rain had softened to a mist. Gabe opened her door. She stepped out, knees wobbling once, but Arlo's shoulder brushed her thigh, steady until she found her balance. Inside the warm glow of Gabe's modest kitchen, he set a mug of chamomile on the table and flicked on the kettle for himself. Clara wrapped her fingers around the cup, letting the steam kiss her bruised knuckles, letting the bitter edges of the day begin to dissolve. Arlo circled once, then lay across the threshold of the doorway, guardian at his post. Clara looked down at him. "You stayed," she whispered, voice ragged. His tail thumped once against the floorboards. She exhaled a long, uneven breath. The fight was far from finished. Tomorrow would bring legal motions, media scrutiny, shadows that slithered under doors. But in this small kitchen, tonight, there was stillness. There was a locked door, a kettle hissing itself to calm, and a dog who had not once doubted her truth. Clara closed her eyes, letting the warmth seep through cracked places. Tomorrow, they would begin again. Tonight, Arlo was beside her, unmoved, unshakable, and enough. Morning slipped into Willow Haven beneath a rim of bleached cloud, turning Gabe's tiny kitchen the color of old linen. Clara rinsed a mug, letting the routine steady her. Kettle click, fridge hum, Arlo's nails tapping hope across the linoleum. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. 2 clipped sentences. We need to talk. Come alone. Ceramic cracked against steel. The word smelled of Matthew, commands masquerading as invitation. Another text followed. Don't ignore me. 10 minutes, or I come find you. No punctuation. Rage never needed commas. Clara's pulse leapt. Go or run? Restraining orders felt like tissue this morning. Arlo nudged her thigh, amber eyes an anchor. Clara lifted the phone, typed the bravest sentence she owned. I'm not coming. Any further contact violates the order. Leave me alone. She hit send. Silence. Only a weather app notification, rain by noon, replied. Clara managed a shaky laugh. Then the screen brightened again. Shelter's address isn't a secret. Neither is your sister's kid's school. A dawn photo of Rachel's yard appeared. Swing set, empty slide, captioned, clocks ticking. Fear shoved decision aside. Clara waited inside, collar up, an almost pastoral figure. You came, he said. Smile, gentle enough to frighten angels. Clara stayed behind the railing. What do you want? To talk. No cops, no mutt. His gaze skinned the empty path. You threatened my family, she said. I promised I'd see you. He opened his hands, as if offering absolution. Come home, Clara. We'll fix this before anyone else gets hurt. Home twisted her stomach. She shook her head. Matthew's veneer cracked. You think that dog can protect you? That washed-up cop scares me? Wind hissed off the river. Only a lone jogger rounded the bend, earbuds sealing him in ignorance. Matthew stepped through the rail. You will always be mine. He lunged, fist knotting Clara's collar, slamming her against a post. Pain flared through bruised ribs. Air fled her lungs. Some deep, dormant part of her lit like dry grass. She sucked in breath and screamed, raw, siren loud, shaking birds from branches. Shut up! Matthew snarled. But she screamed again. The jogger skidded, earbuds ripped free. Matthew hesitated, fight, tilting toward flight, then bolted down the steps, disappearing into the river brush. Clara gasped after him, coat torn, button pinging into dead leaves. Call 911, she wheezed. The jogger pressed his phone into her trembling hand. Dispatch crackled, sirens stirred. Minutes later, Gabe's cruiser fishtailed onto the gravel. Arlo sprang from the back seat, barreled into Clara's arms. She folded against the shepherd's broad chest, tears hot and unbelieving. Gabe knelt, anchor steady. You're safe, he murmured. And for the first time, she believed it. Evening found Clara at Rosewood Cemetery, the adrenaline now ashes in her veins. She had refused the ambulance, but needed ground that wouldn't shift. A deputy drove her through wrought-iron gates, glazed with dusk. Gabe stood by a simple headstone, dress jacket over one arm. Arlo rested at his heel. Clara's knees nearly folded. Gravel crunched. Gabe lifted his head, concern softening his features. Arlo launched forward, colliding with her like a living shield. She collapsed to her knees, fingers clutching fur. A single sob tore out, ugly, unfiltered. Gabe reached them. "They said you refused medical." "I didn't want hospitals. I wanted this." Her voice quavered. He draped his jacket around her shoulders. Only then did she read the stone. Catherine May Whitaker, beloved wife, believing, not because the outcome was guaranteed, but because Arlo's calm said so. "I don't want to hide anymore," she murmured. "Then we won't," Gabe replied. "We'll stand together." The words settled between them like new earth tamped over an old wound. Clara rose. Arlo mirrored her, leaning into her calf to steady shaky legs. "Home?" she asked. "Home," Gabe agreed. "Tomorrow we start paperwork for a new trial. He doesn't get the last word." Clara stroked Arlo's head. "Not while we have breath." Gabe offered his arm, not rescuer to victim, but companion to companion. She slipped her hand through, feeling living warmth on one side, silent canine promise on the other. They walked toward the gate, woman, officer, shepherd, leaves swirling at their feet. Behind them, the river whispered secrets to the stones. Catherine's epitaph glowed beneath the lamp, and Clara stepped, finally, into steady harbor. The fellowship hall of First Baptist smelled of lemon polish and hymnals, the folding chairs pulled into a tight semicircle beneath a fading Welcome Neighbors banner. A Monday drizzle tapped the stained glass windows, but inside no one hid behind umbrellas or excuses. Sheriff Gabe Whitaker stood at the front, uniform jacket open, badge gleaming heavier than brass. Beside him waited the people who kept Willow Haven's pulse, Mayor Patricia Collins, hair pinned in a no-nonsense twist, glasses catching every flicker of shame. Pastor Robert Davis, Bible edges worn to velvet. Dr. Elena Winters, ER indentations forever creased into her collarbones. Judith Hale, head librarian, manila folders trembling in her arms. Clara sat in the second row, Arlo curled at her feet. She hadn't planned to speak. Gabe had summoned this meeting. Yet the hush in the room felt as if it were waiting for her heartbeat to set tempo. Gabe cleared his throat. "We're here because what happened to Clara isn't an outlier. It's a symptom of how we've failed. Matthew Reed is free until retrial, but this is larger than one man. It's every red flag we ignored." Judith stepped forward, hugging her folders. Incident reports from the library, women seeking legal pamphlets but too afraid to check them out. 15 in 3 years, none followed up until Clara. She placed the folders on a folding table with a soft, definitive thud. Dr. Winters opened her notebook. ER charts, fractures, concussions labeled falls, lacerations stitched after, kitchen accidents. Patterns noted, but without consent, they never moved. Pastor Davis's voice cracked. "I heard confessions, urged prayer, not intervention. I thought I was safeguarding marriage." Mayor Collins withdrew a leather ledger, older than some attendees. "Our complicity. Someone else will bleed, and it will be on us." Gabe met Clara's eyes. "Would you like to speak?" She stayed seated, hand resting on Arlo's head. "Silence is heavier than exhaustion," she said, voice low yet carrying. Matthew banked on closed doors, hospital doors, church doors, city hall doors. He knew if each of you held only one puzzle piece, no one would recognize the monster. Judith wiped tears. Dr. Winters pressed a fist to her mouth. The mayor straightened. "Then today, we tape the pieces together. I'm creating an interagency task force, police, social services, medical, faith leaders. We cross-reference every domestic violence call, every quiet settlement. We build a timeline the DA can't ignore. Pastor Davis closed his Bible and laid it on the table. The church will host survivor support meetings, documented, not hidden. And from the pulpit, we will name the sin, not bury it. Dr. Winters snapped her notebook shut. Hospital protocol changes now. We ask the second question, are you safe at home? And we flag charts for follow-up. Judith set her shoulders. The library becomes a covert resource hub, private browsers, pamphlets given without checkout history, staff trained to read coded requests. Gabe added, police will run hourly patrols past restraining order addresses, no paperwork swept under rugs. A charged silence followed, like air before cleansing rain. Arlo's tail thumped, punctuation to the pledge. Clara rose, legs unsteady but spirit upright. Thank you, she whispered, meeting every eye. From the back, Martha Wilson, cane propped beside her, said, seeing isn't enough. We act, or we're accomplices. The mayor extended her hand. Clara took it. One by one, palms linked, mayor to pastor, pastor to doctor, librarian to survivor, until the semicircle closed around Arlo, standing sentinel at its center. In that fluorescent hall, Willow Haven redrew its map of accountability while the rain carried old secrets downstream. Coffee refills cooled, but no one left. Gabe had just outlined the task force draft when Pastor Davis ventured another thought. Until retrial, perhaps Clara should stay with her sister in Raleigh. A hush rippled. A few reluctant nods surfaced. Dr. Winters called it a reasonable suggestion. Clara stood before Gabe could speak, tension tugging Arlo into a half-rise. No, she said. I've already left my classroom, my house, my town. I'm done living like a ghost. Mayor Collins sighed. The threat is real. It is, Clara agreed, steadying her trembling hands on Arlo's shoulders. But why do survivors always pack bags while abusers get river? I taught half the kids in this town. Bullies don't get the swing set. The gardeners do. Eleanor Price, frail but fierce, tapped her cane. Then we stand guard. Momentum shifted. Martha offered her porch as watchtower. Judith proposed self-defense nights at the library. Pastor Davis quoted Isaiah, repairer of broken walls. The mayor clinched it. Pine Creek repairs its walls. Clara stays. We shield. Plans flew. Dedicated hotlines, patrol routes, reflective vests, flyers. Energy rose, no longer guilt but resolve. Clara knelt to Arlo, whispered, We're not running. He swept dew with his tail. She straightened and gave a single radiant nod. Arlo stood too. In Gabe's chest, hope stirred for the first time since Catherine's funeral. Pastor Davis closed in prayer, less benediction, more marching orders. Chairs scraped back, clipboards swapped hands, umbrellas opened. Clara paused at the threshold, looked back at the town primed to follow her into open daylight. This is my home, she said. Thank you for letting me stay. Thank you, the mayor answered, for reminding us whose town it is. The first day of the new plan dawned copper soft, mist curling off the chowan. Clara stepped onto her porch with a thermos of peppermint tea Gabe had brewed, and stopped. Waiting at her gate stood Willow Haven's inaugural watch relay. Judith Hale in a reflective vest, umbrella brandished like a staff. Martha Wilson, cane in one hand, high-visibility armband on the other. Tyler Jenkins, high school senior from Clara's first kindergarten class, earbuds dangling, phone loaded with a neighborhood watch app a deputy coded over the weekend. Arlo bounded down the steps. Judith clipped an extender leash to his harness. "Morning, Professor," she chirped. "Your escort awaits." They set off through town. Mrs. O'Leary's bakery chalkboard read, "Free coffee for watch volunteers." City Hall displayed a banner for an upcoming Light the Night Against Violence 5K. The once ominous gazebo bore police tape and fresh floodlights. At each corner, new sentinels joined in relay. Pastor Davis with Dr. Winters, two off-duty firefighters, soccer moms with strollers. Even the mail carrier idled until Clara crossed safely. Outside Pine Creek Elementary, Principal Monroe waited with coffee. Inside, Clara's classroom gleamed with fresh supplies and a butterfly mobile made from stained glass scraps. The children had already named the new safety curriculum, Arlo's Rules for Brave Hearts. Across town, journalist Rachel Chen's headline went live at 9 a.m. Hidden in plain sight, how one town is turning the tide on domestic violence. Comments flooded in, some venomous, most supportive. By noon, grant a $10,000 anonymous gift in honor of women who kept shopping, even when bruises made smiling hurt. County funds matched it. Volunteers installed security cameras and planted a sensory garden trauma therapists had begged for. Saturday found Gabe on the community center stage, Arlo at heel, 30 residents in metal chairs. He taught wrist breaks, improvised alarms, the gospel of documenting bruises. Arlo modeled blocking posture, drawing applause. Sign-up sheets overflowed. 1 week after the town hall vow, Clara walked home beneath a sunset rinsed pink. Tyler rolled a skateboard beside her. Judith hovered 2 paces back, texting the next watch shift. Martha rocked on her porch swing, binoculars gleaming. Porch lights blinked on like synchronized fireflies. Quiet promises. We see you. At her gate, Clara tried to dismiss her escort. I'm safe. Judith smiled. Safety is a practice, not a place. Arlo nudged Clara's hip, as if to sign the truth. No black truck idled, but if danger returned, it would enter a floodlit net of witnesses. Inside the cottage, she dropped her keys, slid the new bolt, unclipped Arlo's leash. On the hall table lay the Gazette, folded to Clara's midnight op-ed, Why We Stay. The final line read, Safety isn't leaving. Safety is when the town decides to stay with you. She poured peppermint tea, opened her journal, and wrote, I stood, they stood, we stand. Outside, watch volunteers settled in. Porch swings creaked, patrol cars rolled, motion lights glowed. Not walls of fear, but walls of witness. And, in the quiet house on Sycamore Lane, a survivor sank into the first unafraid breath of her new hometown. A town that learned a dog's steadfast heart could teach humans to hold the line.
1 year after the mistrial, Clara's cottage at Maple and 3rd looked like a living postcard. Buttercream siding, window boxes spilling petunias, wind chimes humming a mellow sea. Barefoot on the porch, a mug of cinnamon coffee in her hands, she still collected peaceful moments the way children press wildflowers between pages. Ginger gold light on basil leaves, dragonflies skating the air, Arlo's silver-flecked muzzle tilting at every distant footfall. The cottage itself was Willow Haven's quiet apology. Mayor Collins had smoothed path grants. The credit union officer whispered, down payment on our conscience, and Martha Wilson pressed a lucky brass barrel pen into Clara's fingers when she signed the deed.
Played rummy. Emma crowned Arlo with a felt tiara that he endured like a saint. Every wall testified to reclaimed space. A collage of student art labeled Miss Jennings' Butterfly Brigade, Gabe's photo of Catherine's lighthouse, a shadow box holding Arlo's retired badge, and the splintered porch rail that changed everything. A squeal lured Clara windowside. Emma chased Bubbles, David flipped burgers, Gabe's truck rolled to the curb. Now Chief Whitaker, he still looked like the man who listened more than he spoke. Arlo barked a greeting, resumed shepherding children from the hot grill. When Gabe reached the porch with lemonade, Clara brushed a curl from her cheek. The shyness between them lived in sunlight now, not shadow. Plates filled with grilled corn and peach pie, conversation hopped from Tyler's college essays to a planned town square renovation. Nobody spoke Matthew Reed's name. He was 3 counties away, serving 4 years for restraining order violations during the retrial. A late rain on parched earth. The town mentioned him only as a cautionary landmark it had outgrown. At dusk, fireflies rose among thyme. Clara lit pillar candles, Emma's crooked crown still dangling from a now dozing Arlo. "You look settled," Rachel observed. Clara tasted the word like soil. "I'm home." Gabe handed her a fresh mug, their fingers brushing. A quiet spark beneath porch light glow. Beyond the picket fence lay a town that kept its curtains open now. Within it, enough. Reclaimed soil, voices unafraid, a dog guarding dreams from the soft edge of sleep. Clara raised her mug to everything still growing. Saturday dawned crisp, Clara's breath ribboning beneath the porch light. Pumpkin spice muffins grounded her nerves before the New Beginnings fundraiser. Arlo, sporting a Halloween bandana splashed with cartoon ghosts, thumped approval. She snapped a photo. "Come meet our honorary greeter tonight." Flower-dusted sunlight, cinnamon-soothed memory. Last year her hands had shaken at the auction table. Tonight she would stand steady, because the shelter's slogan now read, "Homes, not hush," and nobody spoke in euphemism. 3 gentle knocks. Martha Wilson entered, sage shawl trailing, a basket of late apples in hand. They shared coffee at the kitchen table while muffin batter thickened. Martha's gaze swept the sunlit room. No shadows now. "You're different," she said. "You move as if you never questioned your right to space." Clara flushed. Some days still feel borrowed. Martha clicked her tongue. "Borrowed or owned, it's yours." This morning, Clara set the mixing bowl down. Impossible. He had 6 months. "Overcrowding, good behavior credits," Gabe explained. He'd argued risk assessment but lost. Conditions, GPS ankle monitor, 50-mile exclusion from Pine Creek. Weekly check-ins. Gabe promised triple patrols, escorts, but added, "If you'd rather skip tonight." "No." The word dropped like a stone. "If I cancel, what message does that send? New Beginnings is for people who refuse to disappear." She scratched Arlo's ruff. "Besides, my co-host is already dressed." Gabe's guarded smile broke through. He sprinkled streusel while Martha diced apples, Arlo supervising. The news hovered but did not choke the air. The cottage remained butter-warm. When muffins cooled, Clara packed boxes for the auction, giving Arlo a pumpkin-soft sample. Martha dabbed crumbs. "These taste of backbone." Gabe promised, "I'll escort you at 5. Remember, the whole town is the fence now." Clara answered, "And I'm one of its boards." The community center gym glittered under cafe bulbs. Mason jar vases reflecting pinpricks of resolve. Auction baskets lined the walls. Quilts, local honey, a lakeside weekend. But the real centerpiece was the hum of survivors and neighbors tuning themselves to courage. Backstage, Clara breathed pumpkin, latex paint, and a fraying microphone cord. Her hands fluttered until Arlo nudged them to his head. She pressed her forehead to his and whispered, "I can do this." He answered with a calm exhale. Courage wasn't still knees. It was knees that trembled, yet stood. Clara stepped to the lectern, Arlo beside her wearing a satin, honorary greeter sash. Applause rolled up like a warm tide. She scanned the faces. Mayor Collins, Pastor Davis, Dr. Winters, Judith Hale, Tyler in college colors hoodie, Martha, front row shawl gleaming. Gabe leaned against a wall, arms folded, watchful, the badge beneath his blazer invisible but present. "My name is Clara Jennings," she began, voice shaky, but steadied by Arlo's solid ribcage nudging her calf. "A year ago, I believed silence kept me safe. Tonight, this hall proves the opposite. Voices build walls stronger than fear." She recounted New Beginnings' doubled capacity, a sensory garden for trauma therapy, 3 families who found permanent housing. She thanked the Quilting Circle, the Rotary Grant, the anonymous benefactor who donated $10,000 in honor of women who kept shopping even when bruises hurt to smile. She ended with a promise. "We don't hush anymore, and we won't hush anyone else." Courage-themed novels sold for $600. Martha's homemade apple butter trio fetched $200. Arlo's Day with a Hero Dog adventure, including a park picnic and honorary deputy bandana, ignited a bidding war among 3 families. A 6-year-old in pigtails won at $450. Crowd cheering as Arlo wiggled acceptance. Clara refilled lemonade. Gabe joined her by the punch bowl. "You're running the room like a pro," he whispered. She grinned. "Muffins help." A deputy approached, subtle nod. Matthew's ankle monitor pinged in the state capitol, far outside the exclusion zone. Gabe lifted 2 cups. "To fences that move with you," he toasted. Their fingertips brushed again, spark curling beneath gymnasium fluorescence. A vacation package drew cheers. Tyler's tech donation, a custom security camera setup, won by an elderly widow who hugged him so tight his glasses skewed. Clara returned to the lectern. "Tonight we raised $42,317, she announced, double last year." Applause thundered. She thanked volunteers, then invited everyone to the candlelit courtyard. Outside, October sky threw diamonds of stars above breath clouds. Survivors stood shoulder to shoulder with deputies, teenagers, church deacons. Pastor Davis quoted Isaiah, "Repairer of broken walls," and Mayor Collins declared the town square gazebo officially rededicated as Catherine Whitaker Memorial Safe Haven, floodlit and monitored. Clara held her candle high. A breeze rocked the flame, but dozens of cupped hands shielded it. Gabe's broad palm, Judith's paper-thin fingers, Tyler's calloused knuckles, Emma's small fist wrapped in mittens. No flame extinguished. Across town, porch lights blinked in solidarity, living constellations. Gabe leaned close. "Drive escort home?" She nodded. Arlo wagged. As they crossed the parking lot, Clara glimpsed her reflection in the cruiser window. Flame glow on cheekbones, shoulders square. She remembered hiding behind partially packed suitcases, memorizing exits. Tonight, she walked the center stripe of Willow Haven's main road. Warmth on each side, dog to left, officer to right, town all around. At the cottage, candles flickered on the porch rail. Gabe swept the drive once with a flashlight, then handed Clara the beam. Your turn. She traced light across petunias, herb beds, silent street. No chamomile. Shuffled barefoot to the porch. She logged a final entry in her journal. We raised more than money. We raised guardianship. Fireflies winked over time. Wind chimes sang an unafraid chord. Somewhere beyond county lines, a man walked under a sky turning rust gold. But Willow Haven's porch lights held the dark at bay. Arlo nosed open the screen, lay across the threshold, half inside, half out, exactly where a sentinel belongs. Clara scratched his ears. Still festive, she teased, tugging the ghost-patterned bandana. His tail answered, yes. She curled into the porch swing, blanket pulled to her chin, candlelight pooling at her feet. The night air tasted of nutmeg, applewood, the faint electricity of changed futures. Maple leaves rattled overhead. Dragonflies slept in the herb garden. And Clara, once a woman who catalogued exits, pressed this moment, like a wildflower, into memory's safest book. Inside the cottage, lamplight glowed like quiet applause. Outside, wind carried a mellow sea from the chimes. In between, a reclaimed life breathed steady as any homelit harbor, wide enough now for every healed wing to unfold. Martha's head peeked past the curtain. 5 minutes. The older woman's lipstick was the color of ripe cherries. The twinkle in her eyes, steadier than any spotlight, reminded Clara why she was here. Martha slipped away, cane tapping a confident tempo. Clara exhaled, straightened, smoothed the ghost and pumpkin bandana at Arlo's neck. She thought of the message Gabe delivered that morning, "Matthew Reed is out," and felt the familiar chill skitter up her spine. Fear still knew her address, but it no longer held the deed. She closed her eyes. "You're allowed to feel it," the therapist had said. "Just don't furnish it a room." Tonight, fear got standing room only. When the MC, a buoyant college freshman who credited the shelter with saving her mother, introduced Miss Clara Jennings, our Butterfly Brigade founder, applause rose like a tide. Clara stepped through the curtain. The gym's high windows had darkened to mirror the inside scene. Strings of light, loops of orange ribbon, tables of expectant faces. Arlo padded beside her, nails clicking on varnished wood. Close, always close. She reached the podium. The microphone squealed, then complied. Walked on eggshells so often, I forgot the sound of bare wood underfoot. She paused, glanced at Arlo. Then a dog, just doing his job, reminded me I was worth protecting. He didn't ask for proof. He heard what every wall, neighbor, and courtroom had missed. Murmurs of agreement rose, soft, laughed, fierce. Yes, I'm still afraid. The confession loosened a knot beneath her sternum. News travels fast in small towns. You've heard my abuser is free again. Fear came knocking this morning. She laid a hand on her chest. I answered. I told it, I hear you, but you have no power here. She watched the words land, some on tear-bright cheeks, others on rigid shoulders, finally dropping an inch. Safety isn't the absence of danger, she continued. It's the presence of people who refuse to let danger speak louder than truth. Clara gestured to the room, mayor, librarian, pastor, teenagers in reflective vests. You are those people. Each porch light left on, every chaperoned walk home, each dollar in these jars. Together they form a sentence that says, we will not be silent accomplices. She inhaled, the gym's air thick with cinnamon and courage. If you are in pain tonight, hear me. You are not your past, you are your voice. And someone will hear you, even if it starts with a dog who refuses to walk away. Laughter rippled, tender and releasing. Arlo's tail thumped the stage. Clara leaned toward the mic, softer now. 1 year ago, I stood on a porch believing no help would come. Tonight, I stand on this stage knowing an entire town carries porch lights in their pockets, ready to run toward the scream instead of shrinking from it. Thank you for keeping them lit. Applause swelled, hand claps, chair legs scraping, a whistle from the back. The noise filled every corner, lifted rafters built for basketball banners, not broken hearts. Clara stepped aside, and the MC returned, cheeks wet, voice bright with hope. Auction bids resumed, laughter folded into the evening's fabric. Backstage, Gabe found Clara packing her notes. You shattered it, he said. She blinked. Shattered what? The lie that fear owns you. He touched the stage floor with his boot, and maybe fear that owned the rest of us too. Clara's smile was small but iron-wrought. I'll keep shattering as long as it tries to rebuild. Arlo nosed between them, and Gabe scratched behind his ears. Guard still on duty, he told the dog. Arlo leaned into the touch, then pressed closer to Clara's side, as if confirming the assignment. Later, as candle bags flickered along the sidewalk, guiding guests to their cars, Clara and Arlo stepped under Arlo's head, bump against her thigh. I'm not afraid anymore, she said into the dark. Maybe fear still lurked, night creature patient. But its roar was outvoiced by porch lights, by newsletters, by pumpkin spice muffins, by children learning Arlo's rules for brave hearts. Most of all, by the woman who now spoke her own name with certainty. Arlo exhaled and stayed pressed against her, close, always close. And in that whisper-thin space between heartbeats, Clara felt the quiet roar of a town standing watch, steady as a dog's breath, bright as porch-light constellations, and she knew that whatever waited beyond tomorrow, she would never face it alone again. Late winter sunlight spilled across the refurbished foyer of New Beginnings, soft as flannel and scented faintly of fresh paint and lavender cleaner. A crackling wood stove, donated by the local firefighters' union, popped welcoming sparks behind its glass door. Clara stood near the reception desk, clipboard tucked under one arm, watching the newest intake step hesitantly over the threshold. The woman, early 30s, wind-chapped cheeks, oversized sweatshirt, clutched a duffel that sagged with hastily packed clothes. Her right hand, red from gripping a steering wheel for 200 highway miles, hovered protectively over a bruise blooming beneath foundation. Her name was Lisa Shepherd, but she'd written it on the intake form like an apology, the letters shrinking left to right. Arlo ambled forward first, slow, deliberate, as if understanding that prey animals bolt when startled. His silver-flecked muzzle dipped. He gave a single, polite wag before lowering to a sphinx-like sit 3 feet away. Lisa's shoulders slumped in relief she hadn't known she was holding. Clara approached, voice low, cadence gentle. "Hi, Lisa. I'm Clara, resident advocate on Saturdays and unofficial muffin supplier every other day." She smiled. "That handsome fellow is Arlo. He's the official greeter." Lisa managed a whisper. "He's big." "Only in heart," Clara assured. "You set the distance, he'll respect it." The new arrival nodded, still rooted to the mat where Welcome Home curled in teal script. Her eyes rifled the room, crocheted blankets, folded on shelving cubbies, a bulletin board plastered with job fair flyers and children's art, a ceramic plaque above the stove that read, "Here we water wilted wings." The sight seemed to buckle her knees. She sagged onto the nearest armchair, duffel sliding to the floor with a muffled thud. Silence swelled, heavy with unspoken histories. Clara lowered herself into the adjacent chair, clipboard forgotten, hands resting open on denim-clad knees. Lisa stared at the hearth. "I don't know which—" Clara's face, searching for judgment, finding none. Her lips parted, then closed. Tears pooled silently, no sobs, just overflow. She swiped at them, embarrassed. "Sorry, I'm not usually—" "It's okay." Clara offered a tissue box. A log shifted in the stove, sending a small flare behind the glass. Arlo remained motionless, except for the metronome rise and fall of his breathing. His calm filled the room like a low hymn. Lisa inhaled shakily. "I thought it was me. My fault. He said if I were better, smarter, quieter, he wouldn't have to—" Her voice fractured. She traced the frayed strap on her duffel with a thumb. "But then he started on the kid's hamster, through the cage. I heard the metal hit the wall, and I knew the next thing he picked up wouldn't be a hamster." Clara's chest tightened with remembered echoes, porch lights, a shattered photo. She resisted the urge to reach out. Instead, she mirrored Lisa's posture, grounding the moment. "You protected your children by leaving. That takes spine." Lisa sniffed, offered a brittle laugh. "Feels more like splinters." She looked at Arlo again. "He sensed I was scared. How?" "Dogs read what we try to hide," Clara said. "Arlo saved my life the night I forgot I had one worth saving." Lisa absorbed this, eyes widening as puzzle pieces slid into place. "You're that, Clara. The newspaper articles, the fundraiser speeches, stories whispered in shelters from county to county." "I didn't realize." Clara shrugged lightly. "I'm just further down the path you stepped onto today. It's not a race. We walk it together." She gestured to the hallway, lined with dorm-style bedrooms. "Your space is ready. Fresh linens, a journal on the nightstand. Write or rest. Tonight you choose." Lisa's bottom lip quivered. "I'm scared." "We started there too," Clara assured. "Fear is honest. It means you know danger. It doesn't mean danger owns you." Footsteps approached. Meredith Campbell, the shelter director, carrying a tray of cocoa mugs. She nodded to Clara, then knelt by Lisa's chair. "Thought you might need warmth from the inside out." Lisa accepted a mug, the steam clouding her tears into invisibility. Meredith turned to Clara. "Can you give her the tour?"
Of course.
Clara rose, motioned for Arlo to stay. He obeyed, settling his head on his paws, a doorstep of living reassurance while Meredith covered intake paperwork. Clara led Lisa down the corridor. Each door bore a small wooden knight. She'd declared, "I'm not afraid anymore." "Normal changes," she answered. "But joy returns in ways you can't predict. First in minutes, then in hours." She smiled. "Sooner than you think, you'll argue about which playlist to use for pasta night." Lisa's shoulders lifted on a fragile breath that might one day become laughter. "Okay." They walked back to the foyer, where Arlo rose to escort Lisa to her room. She hesitated, then reached a tentative hand toward his head. He accepted the touch, eyes half closing. "Soft," she murmured, as if soft were a forgotten language. Clara retrieved her clipboard, signed off the final line of Lisa's intake, and met Meredith's approving gaze. Each woman knew the ledger of steps still ahead: court dates, counseling, custody filings. But today's footfall mattered. A first door closed behind safety, not threat. Lisa disappeared into the Bloom room, Arlo padding beside her. Clara lingered, heart full. She glanced at the plaque above the stove. "Here we water wilted wings," and thought how 1 year ago hers had been bone dry. Footsteps returned. Arlo trotted back, bandana askew. He pressed against Clara's thigh, gaze asking, "What next?" She scratched behind his ear. "Now," she said, voice soft but sure, "we go home. The garden needs pruning, and someone's promised ghost-patterned cookies for the PTA." Arlo wagged once, ready. Clara slipped on her coat, waved to Meredith, and stepped into late afternoon light. The sky blushed coral. Maple Street's first porch light glowed against the dusky blue. Behind her, a woman began the slow work of unpacking a duffel of fear. Ahead of her, a cottage waited, windows bright, wind chimes singing, proof that beginnings, however fragile, could indeed become homes. She walked toward that promise, Arlo pacing at her side, steady as heartbeat. The cottage was hushed beneath a shawl of moonlight, windows aglow with lamplight, warm as candlewick. Clara moved through the quiet rooms, performing her evening rituals, locking the front door, checking the stove dials twice, old habit, pouring Arlo one last scoop of water so he wouldn't nudge her awake at dawn. The shepherd followed, nails ticking softly on hardwood, ghost bandana swapped for a flannel one stitched with tiny blue stars. In the study, she opened the bay window an inch to hear the night choir. Crickets, a distant barred owl, the river breathing beyond the sycamores. Arlo circled his floor pillow once, twice, and plopped down with a sigh that fluttered the pages of her open notebook. Clara settled at the desk. A single lamp cast an amber pool, its resonance inside her ribs. Outside, a porch light across the street flicked on. Mrs. O'Leary letting the cat in. Safety's heartbeat. Clara leaned forward, pen gliding again. "I used to think freedom would feel weightless, like balloons rising. It's heavier, actually. Heavy like rain-soaked soil, rich enough for roots." Memory unspooled. The shelter corridor with its courage and grace plaques. Lisa Shepherd's trembling smile. Arlo's silent vow. She pressed the pen to the page. "Arlo didn't save me. He showed me I was worth saving. B, my therapist, says mirrors come in strange forms. Some bark and wear bandanas." She paused, smiling. Arlo lifted his head, sensing her attention, and thumped his tail once. "Talking about you," she murmured. He huffed as if to say, "Keep it honest." Ink flowed. When fear knocks now, I open the door with company. Gabe's patrol route, Martha's binoculars, the kids' scribbled butterflies, the hum of neighbors on the watch app. Fear still visits, but it doesn't move in. Sometimes it just needs to see the vacancy sign. The nib scratched faintly, comforting, like crickets. She flipped back a few pages. September, after the fundraiser, when the parole notice first arrived. There, in smaller handwriting, she'd penned a mantra. Your abuser's voice is not the final word on your story. She traced the sentence with her fingertip, ink slightly ridged on paper. It had steadied her through courtroom corridors, grocery aisles, where she swore she saw Matthew's profile in every tall stranger, sleepless nights when storm gusts mimicked slammed doors. Tonight, the mantra deserved reiteration. She copied it, larger, centered. Your abuser's voice is not the final word on your story. Then she added beneath, neither is fear's. The final word is written in porchlight constellations, in wind chime hymns, in dogs' soft breathing, and in my own handwriting. Outside, the owl hooted again. 3 longs, 1 short. Arlo answered with a low whine, head tilting before he settled. Clara glanced at the clock. 11:11. Make a wish, Emma always said. She pressed pen to page. Wish that Lisa finds her laugh before summer. Wish that Arlo never loses the puppy sparkle behind his wise eyes. Wish that my students believe their voices can fill more than classrooms, that they can fill the world. She dotted the period with a tiny flourish, easing like beads on a string. Arlo lumbered upright, shook out a sigh, ready to escort her down the hall. She flicked off the lamp. Moonlight pooled in its place, pale but sufficient. Bedroom curtains billowed with a cool river breeze. Clara climbed beneath the quilt, Emma's ghostly stitches dancing along the hem, and patted the rug. Arlo settled at his customary post, chin over crossed paws, sentinel and lullaby. Before switching off the bedside lamp, she whispered into the stillness as ritual. Good night, Catherine, nodding to the lighthouse photo. Good night, Lisa. Good night, world. And because ownership of voice means framing the last note, she added softly, firmly, I'm still writing. She clicked off the light. The cottage breathed into darkness, no longer hiding, but resting, and the night carried her words outward, past sycamores, across starlit river, to any ear in need of hearing that survival does not whisper. It narrates. Sunday afternoon unspooled slow as ribbon, sunshine slanting through the cottage's lace curtains and pooling across the kitchen floor where Arlo dozed, paws twitching in dream pursuit. Clara finished her weekly journal entry at the oak table, ink still wet on a closing line that read, Today tastes of cinnamon and possibility. She blew gently across the page, savoring the faint scent of cedar from the notebook's paper, then folded the cover shut with a soft thud. Silence settled, alive, not empty. Outside, wind finger-combed the sycamore leaves. Chimes over the porch clinked a lazy harmony. Clara stood, stretching arms overhead, feeling ribs expand without protest. 1 year, 8 months, and 16 days since the porch scream. She still counted sometimes, but the tally marked distance now, not danger. She reached for the kettle when the doorbell chimed. 3 quick notes of eager energy. Arlo's head snapped up, ears pricked. A low boof rumbling curiosity rather than alarm. Clara wiped her ink-smudged fingertips on her jeans and strolled to the front door, heart already guessing. Through the sidelight glass she spotted a jumble of bright colors, construction paper banners, glittered edges, and a forest of little hands gripping the porch rail. Her students, of course. They'd whispered Friday about a secret weekend expedition, and she'd played along, suspecting nothing bigger than a group project. She cracked the door. 12 kindergartners burst into a chorus of, "Surprise, Miss Jennings!" voices trilling like songbirds let loose. Clara opened the door wide. "Well, look at this traveling art gallery." Emma, Rachel's daughter and unofficial event planner, stepped up first, clutching a poster nearly as tall as she was. Painted across the sheet in rainbow brushstrokes, "Home is where our voices grow." Underneath, each child had traced a handprint, fingerprints swirled in paint. Clara's throat knotted. "We wanted to thank you," Emma announced, cheeks pink from importance, "for teaching us butterflies aren't quiet." She grinned. "And for the muffins." Annie, the shyest in class, extended a single drawing. Clara and Arlo standing in front of the school, surrounded by cartoon butterflies wearing tiny capes. In bubble letters, "Heroes come in twos." Clara knelt so eyes met. "I'll frame it," she promised, voice thick. One by one, children handed over masterpieces, crayon sunsets, paper flowers, glitter hearts, until Clara's arms brimmed with color. Laughter bubbled from her chest, spilling past lips until it filled the entryway. She hadn't laughed this freely, this reflexively, in years. The sound surprised even her. Tyler explained, "We're delivering kindness posters door to door all week, part of the Safe Voices project. First stop had to be your house." He tipped an imaginary hat. Clara ushered them inside. Arlo guided the procession like a velvet-footed marshal, steering small feet around the umbrella stand, nose nudging stray markers back into pockets. Children fanned into the living room, tacking drawings onto the magnet board Clara kept exactly for moments like this. Colors bloomed across the wall like dawn breaking. Kettle whistling, Clara hurried to prepare cocoa. In 5 minutes the cottage smelled of marshmallow and cinnamon, mugs lined on the coffee table. Kids perched on cushions, giggling through whipped cream mustaches. Arlo lounged at their feet, content under a snowfall of cookie crumbs. Clara leaned against the doorway, watching, heart ballooning so full she nearly expected the rafters to lift. She caught Tyler's eye. He raised brows in a silent question. "You all right?" She nodded, pressing a palm to her chest, grounding the moment. When cocoa was gone and sugar energy lifted decibels toward jet engine range, Clara tapped a spoon against her mug. "Brigade, assemble." The children scrambled into a semicircle, attentive. "Thank you for reminding me what home sounds like," she said, gesturing to the art wall. "These voices make the walls stronger than brick." Tiny chins lifted with pride. She knelt, palms up. "Remember, your voice can do big things, like kindness deliveries, or small things, like telling a friend you're there." She glanced at Arlo. "Even a bark at the right moment can change everything." They giggled, jostled into coats, Emma shepherding poster tubes like a sergeant. At the door, each child hugged Clara's waist in turn, sticky fingers farewell. Annie lingered, whispering, "I'm going to draw bigger butterflies tomorrow." Clara brushed hair from her brow. "Their wings grow with your courage," she replied. The posse spilled down the path, hand in hand, chattering into winter sunlight. Clara waved until the last rainbow hat bobbed around the corner. She closed the door, leaned against it, eyes moist. Silence returned, perfumed by cocoa and crayon wax. Arlo patted over, pressed his head into her thigh with practiced intuition. She splayed fingers through his fur, exhaled a long sigh that slipped seamlessly into a smile. Her gaze swept the living room wall, a mosaic of childlike hope. Beneath the largest poster, space remained. She fetched her journal, tore out the page penned last night. Your abuser's voice is not the final word on your story. She thumbtacked it at heart height, right beside the rainbow motto, "Home is where our voices grow." Stepping back, Clara felt something click, a final puzzle piece sliding snug. The room, the dog, the chorus of young voices reverberating even in their absence. The cottage wasn't just shelter, it was testimony. Arlo sat beside her, shoulder against her shin, close, always close. She looked down. "Life belongs to us again," she whispered, "and to everyone who walks through that door." Outside, the wind lifted, carrying faint echoes of children's laughter. Inside, the butterflies on the wall seemed almost to flutter. Clara reached for her coat. "Come on, partner," she said to Arlo. "Let's take these wings for a walk." The door opened onto a world washed clean by late winter sun, a sidewalk bright with chalk slogans kids had left. "Speak up, be brave, sing loud." Clara stepped out, Arlo pacing at her side, heart synced with the cadence of a town that had learned to stand guard and to celebrate. Porch light off, curtains open, voice steady, Clara walked into the afternoon fueled by laughter, paint, and the steadfast beat of pause beside her. Home at last traveled wherever they did. In the end, Clara's story is really a love letter. To courage, to second chances, and to the quiet loyalty of a good dog. German Shepherds, like Arlo, remind us that devotion doesn't need grand gestures. Sometimes it's a steady shoulder leaned against a trembling knee. Their faith in us can coax out parts of ourselves we thought were lost. And in that shared space of trust, we often find the courage to heal, speak up, or simply breathe easier. If you ever feel inspired to deepen the bond with your own four-legged friend, you might enjoy looking into the AKC's Canine Good Citizen activities. They're gentle, confidence-building exercises for both of you. Nothing fancy, just time set aside to understand each other a bit better. Take it or leave it, of course. The important thing is the wagging tail at your side, and the way your heart softens every time those eyes meet yours. Give your dog an extra ear scratch tonight, and let that simple act be your reminder that love, in its most loyal form, is already right there.